Hey folks, it's Ardwulf with your late to the party unboxing of Great Battles of Julius Caesar Deluxe Edition. This is a new edition of the classic Great Battles of Julius Caesar, the Civil Wars, that came out quite a long time ago from GMT. It is a very good module, assuming you are interested in battles that are Romans against Romans, but this edition also includes a bunch of stuff that was included in various expansions and a standalone game, Caesar Conquest of Gaul. What it does not include are a couple of scenarios that have already been redone in Alexander and in SPQR Deluxe, both of which are similar deluxe editions. I've been waiting for this for years. This is a game I had back in the day, got rid of like a dope. It took a long time to reacquire it at a price that wasn't absolutely bananas. So I immediately jumped on this, and then I was forced, because we bought a house, to back off on the pre-order right when they were billing, because they were just billing at the exact wrong time when I was like unable to predict what the costs were all going to be, and I couldn't afford this and the other thing that came with it. So I had to back off on a round of pre-orders, but never fear, we have it now. So Great Battles of Julius Caesar Deluxe Edition, great looking cover. Got a sort of nice marble thing with a bust of Caesar on the front. This is in the 3-inch box that has become, thankfully, increasingly common from GMT. Even with the 3-inch box, it is going to represent a challenge, but perhaps not an unsurmountable challenge or insurmountable challenge to get everything back in the box with the counters organized. We'll see how that looks. There are a number of options to do that. I will do a later video on storage solutions for this thing if I come up with something novel that I haven't talked about before. So, big box, a lot of material in here. This is another one of these really high value packed omnibus editions that GMT has been doing to my delight in recent years. This is another one. It's a game system that I like a lot. So without further ado, let's get her open. This is, of course, a game designed by Mark Herman and the late and legendary Richard Berg, based on the Great Battles of History system. And the system in each individual Great Battles of History volume can sometimes differ kind of a lot. But in this case, it's pretty much the same system with maybe a couple of minor differences to the GBOH system that you saw in SPQR, which is Roman Republican battles. That's why a couple of those battles were moved out of it. This is Civil Wars battles for the most part, and then, battles centering mostly around Caesar himself. So, in the box, we have some counters. Holy cow. A lot of counters. So there are, we'll take a look at the counters individually, but there are 6 1/2 counter sheets. There is a Great Battles of Julius Caesar scenario book, which is mammoth. There is a rule book. There is the naval rule book. Now this is for 1 or 2 of the scenarios that came out of Caesar Conquest of Gaul. So when we look at the counters, you're going to see naval counters as well. And this is basically a stripped down version of the GBOH naval system as presented in the game War Galley. So let's start with the rule book, first of all. This is a fat rule book. It is 48 pages on matte finish paper. It is full color. It is nicely illustrated. This is fully up to the current production standard over at GMT. There are different command systems specifically for the Romans, and it looks like there's some Pontic specific special command rules as well. The Romans have a rather elaborate command system in these games, at least the Republican and Civil War, the Western Roman Empire stuff. I haven't really looked at Cataphract yet, which is Byzantine stuff, as you might expect from the name. Special units and formations, artillery, whole lot of stuff here. Trying to give Anticigiani, Germans, okay. War elephants, which we will see in the Thapsus scenario. It's been a long day. Barbarian ferocity, that's stuff that we're going to see in the Gaul scenarios, obviously. Okay, what I'm trying to get a sense of here is how much of this rulebook is actually rules, and the answer is almost all of it. About 44 pages. There's an index on the back. I gotta tell you, it's nice to have an index, but usually the indexes are not a strong point of GMT's games. And frankly, there's rather a low number of wargame publishers that really do a good index. And that's largely because it needs to do a good index, you have to do it manually. You can't just use Word and index your stuff based on that. So we got a 48-page rule book, which is mostly rules, like 95% rules. And so this is, maybe not an entry-level game. There is simple GBOH too. You can play pretty much all the scenarios in here with the simple GBOH rules. And there's a simple GBOH battle book that has probably most or all of the scenarios in here. That should still be available from GMT based on the current, relatively recent edition of Simple GBOH. I prefer the regular GBOH rules. I don't think the Simple GBOH rules, I've said this before, are really that much simpler, but they do give you a shortcut in that a lot of the different rules and a lot of the different games get kind of unified in Simple GBOH. So there's reasons to prefer it, but I prefer the full system. I think it gives you better flavor. Now this is the scenario book, and it's huge. It is 80 pages, okay? So let's look at the scenarios. And we get an introduction. This, again, full color matte finish paper. We have Rise of the Roman, this is cool that they're separated into periods. Rise of the Roman warlords, including the scenarios of Cirta, Vercellae, Chaeronea. Those are from the Jugurtha, and the Jugurthine War is a very interesting topic, by the way. Those are from expansions, and here's Cirta, Numidia, 106 BC. This is the one from Jugurtha. This is Vercellae, and this is a pretty big scenario, pretty big looking scenario. It looks like it's on a map and a half. We'll look at the maps in a minute as well. Special rules, here's Chaeronea. This is also a pretty big scenario. This is Sulla versus the Mithridatic General Archelaus. Here's Caesar's Gallic Wars. Scenarios: Bibracte, the Rhine, the Sabas, Bay of Biscay. That's the naval scenario. Britannia, Lutetia, and Gergovia. Now, Gergovia was another expansion. That was an expansion for Caesar Conquest of Gaul that, for a while, I've got it, but it was really pretty hard to get. This is what I would call a medium-sized GBOH scenario. It looks like it's played on one map, might be a map and a half. You should be able to play a scenario of this size in a sitting. It might take you 4 to 6 hours, but it might not. Generally speaking, you kind of know when the game's over in GBOH because one army is going to break. Whether or not it's reached its actual breaking point according to the route points chart. And that's basically how victory in this system is calculated. You have route points, and when you hit the certain number of route points, your army breaks, and that's it. Here's the Battle of the Sabas, which looks pretty specialized, actually. It's in Belgium, 57 BCE. Caesar versus their Nervii, the Viromandui, and the Atrebates. Roman army under Caesar. Here is another, here's Bay of Biscay, actually. It's like Romans against some smaller vessels of the... Now, another thing that's not included in here, I'll point out, is there was a third expansion for Caesar Conquest of Gaul called Battles of the Warrior Queen, which was imperial period, 1st century, I think, mostly AD. And that material is not included in here. However, that expansion for Caesar Conquest of Gaul should still be available. And I think it's still available from GMT. So my copy of that, which is unpunched, will just go in here when we're done. Here's Invasion of Britannia, Battle for Paris, Labienus versus the Parsii, Aulerci and Senones. Here's Gergovia, Caesar versus Vercingetorix. So that's going to be an interesting battle. It looks like an interesting battle, actually. Okay, so we're moving on here. Caesar's Civil Wars, Dyrrachium, Laniskea River, Pharsalus, which is the decisive one, and Nicopolis, Zella, Ruspina, Thapsus, and Munda. These go from 48 to 45 BC. And most of these came out of the Civil Wars, the original Great Battles of Julius Caesar, the Civil Wars, because that's what that focused on. I mean, you may remember when GMT used to put these games out, it only had 4 battles in them. That's just not something they do very often. So here's an interesting looking battle, in part because it kind of looks like it might be a bit of a meeting engagement, and in part because it's on a map that has kind of a lot of terrain. A lot of these ancient battles took place on a big flat space. So here's Lesnikia River, in 48 BC. This is Caesar versus Pompey. Pompey the Great. It turned out to be not all that great. Now here's Pharsalus. This is the decisive battle between Caesar and Pompey in Greece, Thessaly. There's a ton of historical background on all these battles. Some of these will have variant versions as well. Pharsalus is one. This is one of the biggest and most famous battles of the period. Here's Nicopolis, which I'd characterize as a medium-sized scenario. Even the big scenarios, and none of these are record-breaking scenarios. There's a couple of really big scenarios in Hoplite and in Devil's Horseman that are bigger than anything I'm seeing in here. And those are probably weekend projects. But then you also have the games themselves that are standalone games, and specifically relevant to this period are Caesar and Alexandria and Alesia, which is about Alesia, and that's just kind of one big game about the Battle of Alesia. I haven't played that. I'd love to play it. Here's Thapsus. And I'm actually interested in Caesar and Alexandria too. It was kind of hard to track down. And it's not ever going to get reprinted by GMT, according to GMT. It's on their will not reprint list, which is too bad because it's a really interesting situation. It is an ancient city fight. That is not something you see very often. Battle of Munda, this is in Spain. Caesar versus Gnaeus Pompeius. That's later, I think, after Pompey bites it. Or has it bitten for him by the Egyptians, I should say. Roman conquest of Britannia. This is out of Caratacus. Both of these are out of Caratacus, which was the one of the two earlier expansions for Caesar conquest of Gaul. This is looks like maybe Caratacus' army is not interesting. Britons versus Romans under Plautius. Okay. I don't know. We'll have to take a look at the scenario. These are interesting. There's a mix of big scenarios and small scenarios in here. So I think somebody that is new to this game system will have some small ones to kind of get used to the relatively intricate GBOH rules and the supplementarily intricate Roman command rules that are applicable in most or possibly all of these battles. We have some simple GBOH updates here. We have a bunch of sources, which is great to see that. Always good to see, in particular, sources that aren't just the ancient sources, right? Because you can just go read about Caesar conquest of Gaul as recorded by Caesar, right? But it's nice to have more modern sources as well. And there's some interesting ones in here, like Colleen McCullough's First Men in Rome series, which is fantastic, actually. If you're super into Roman stuff, they are historical novels, highly recommended. All right, so we got that. We're not going to dig too closely into the naval rule booklet, except that it is produced to the same high standard as the rest of this stuff, and it is 12 pages. Like I said, this is a stripped-down version of the rules out of War Galley. Okay, so taking a look at the counters. We have, as mentioned before, we have 7. I miscounted. Yep, I miscounted before. There were 7.5 counter sheets. So there's a lot of counters in here. It's going to be pretty challenging to get everything back in the box, but we'll take a look at that in a moment. And as I said, I may do a video on that. So we got your Roman leaders here. You've got your different color-coded Roman legions. In this game, you have a number of scenarios that are, and this is why it is an interesting volume in the series to me. You have a number of battles that are legions versus legions, because it's the Civil Wars. So what that looks like is, at least in some cases, those end up being quite balanced battles, which is often not the case in these ancient world battles, frankly. This stuff is on the pretty typical for GMT nowadays, thick brown core stock. I am particularly looking for any misalignments with the die cutting, which is a thing I have observed in, not so much in the last year or so, but when they were first getting their feet under them with their Chinese printers. That's a problem I noticed with a number of games. I've got 2 or 3 games with counters that are off a square, which is, not the end of the world, but it's pretty irritating. Okay, so also inside the box, we have a big stack of maps and player aids, which we'll look at in a second. We have a bag of dice, which is 2 6-siders and a 10-sider. GBOH is basically a 10-sider system, bag of baggies, and we have an insert which will immediately be removed and deposited in the recycling container, because we do not have room for such foolishness. Now, the reason why we see those inserts is because otherwise the components will rattle around too much in the box during transport, and that's undesirable for reasons that should be obvious. I think the expectation is that we're going to toss them. Offhand, we'll look at it in a second, but it looks like I'm going to get 3 standard GMT counter trays in this pretty easily. So we've got Player Aid Card 1, we've got 2 of those, Player Aid Card 2, they're numbered in Roman numerals, which is pretty great. Movement cost chart for the different terrain types. We have the Clash of Swords chart and the Shock Superiority chart and the Shock Combat results. Pretty much the whole game runs off of this stuff right here. We got missile ranges and fortification effects, which will obviously the fortification effects will only apply in certain scenarios. We got 2 of these. These are on a low gloss, but I'd still call it glossy, medium weight cardstock, medium to heavyweight cardstock. Player Aid Card 2. Again, we got 2 of these. We've got the cohesion hits and the troop quality checks charts. We have command summary. This is pretty important for Roman commanders specifically, because they got a different command system than everybody else in the game system. Summary of orders and Legion line commands. This particular game does use line commands. Not all the GBOH games do. And again, we got 2 of these. Oh, we got a Player Aid Card 3 as well. Now, this is only a 1-pager. Front and back. Sequence of play on here. Leadership checks, leader casualties, rallies, die roll of doom, and the elephant rampage table, which is pretty fantastic. And then we have this display which tracks the route points for the Caesarians and or the Romans and or the Senatorials and the non-Romans. So you can, and game turns. The game turn count is not really super duper important in GBOH. And then we have this naval charts and tables card for the mini war galley stuff from Caesar Conquest of Gaul. And it looks like this is pretty much complete on 1 card, so that's great. Now, map-wise, we have a number of maps here, rather a lot of maps, as you can see. These are probably all double-sided. They sure look like it. Some of them are going to be, so we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 full-size maps and what feels like a half-size map. So let's get one of these maps set up so that you could get a sense of what they actually look like. Okay, so here's the map for the Rhine, Caesar versus Ariovistus in 58 BCE. And I picked this one because it's got a little more terrain on it than most of these do. This is obviously pooching a little bit, but it's a paper map. And that's expected. It is also expected that you would probably put plexi over it if you're going to play this thing. Hexes are a little bigger than you would necessarily expect for a game with half-inch counters, but that is okay. It's not overly big. But the game, something that people say, truthfully, about GBOH is that it can become marker heavy, and therefore the game could get a little crowded. I think this is probably not a problem for somebody that plays, say, Lavatai, but for somebody that plays something like Atlantic Chase, the map is going to maybe get crowded in some of these battles with all the markers and stuff like that. Plus, facing is a factor in all of these games. So I think graphic artists credited here were Roger McGowan, Mark Simonich, and Charlie Kibler. Exactly how that breaks down, I'm not sure, nor without comparing this to the old maps, do I necessarily know how much this has been revised. But it does look like it's been lightly redone to me. The map is on a pretty standard nowadays GMT sort of thick paper. Perfectly fine cardstock. It's got a very slight satin finish. These are perfectly amenable maps. And they're all, by the way, double-sided, if I haven't said that. Now, one of these maps is indeed a half-size map, as anticipated. And what this is going to be is, this is the south map for Munda, which is a map and a half game. And then this is the south map for Pharsalus. So this is the extension map, and there, like I said, as usual, there's kind of a river on the flank here, but there's typically, and there's some gradations on the Munda map. These are elevation levels, by the way. Not forest or anything else like that. As you can see, there's not necessarily a lot of terrain on these maps. That was done on purpose by the ancient commanders who wanted enough space to deploy their troops. So when we put all this stuff back in the box, except for the counters, without measuring it, I think I'm right to say that you'll be able to fit 3 counter trays in that. Now I'm going to have a little trouble fitting 7.5 counter sheets in 3 GMT trays. There's another solution that we may be exploring for this particular game. So this has been the better late than never unboxing of Great Battles of Julius Caesar Deluxe 2022 release from GMT Games, designed by Mark Herman and Richard Burke. Hopefully you found it useful and or illuminating. If so, please do thumbs up the video. Please do subscribe to the channel if you'd like to see more content like this. I would like to give a special shout out to the patrons of Ardwulf's Lair, without whose assistance and support it would be much more difficult to do the kinds of content that we do here at Ardwulf's Lair. So thank you very much, patrons. Once again, thanks for watching, and until next time, happy wargaming.